Is it just me, or is like UFC 309 a major disappointment? I mean, it could deliver on fight night when it plays out. I mean, you can never judge a book by its cover. This card could look like the worst card ever. And then on the night of, all these fights could be insane, but I'm just not feeling the lineup. I mean, what is this card? Like, the main card so far, it looks like Bo Nickel, Paul Craig is the feature fight. I like the co-main event, Oliveira Chandler 2. I like Jones versus Miocic. I'm happy John Jones is back. But then these other fights, like Araujo versus Silva, doesn't seem like a main card fight to me, but whatever. And then you got Martinez versus McGee, Weidman versus Anders. That's like a feature prelim. And I'm pretty sure on the main card, they showed Reyes, not Weidman, Reyes, who fought Weidman, versus Anthony Smith. And I know last year's MSG card wasn't stacked either, but I just feel like the quality of this card could be better because it's Madison Square Garden. I feel like they could have at least had more than one title fight. Like, we just saw Tatiana get screwed over. Zhang Weili Tatiana should be the co-headliner of this card, or it should be 3 title fights with Pantoja versus somebody, and then Weili Tatiana on this card. Then it would be better. The way it is right now, in my opinion, just isn't good enough, just isn't satisfying enough, honestly. Like, MSG, I remember the days when the UFC actually would stack Madison Square Garden, like UFC 205. You had Conor headlining, and there was 2 other title fights. You had Weidman Romero, and then Tate Raquel to open up the main card. Khabib on the prelims, Frankie Edgar on the prelims. And that card was even supposed to have more fights that were like canceled, like Rashad Evans versus Tim Kennedy. Donald Cerrone was supposed to be on that card against Kelvin Gastelum. Some fights fell through, but even in its final form, that card turned out to be one of the greatest cards of 2016. UFC 217, one of the best pay-per-views in the history of the UFC. St. Pierre versus Bisping, 3 title fights. Dillashaw versus Garbrandt, along with the GSP fight, and then Joanna Rose. And then, of course, you had Costa Hendricks, Wonderboy Masvidal. Okay prelims, not stacked prelims like 205, but a stacked, good quality main card for Madison Square Garden. Even UFC 230 wasn't that bad, even though it had like a joke of a main event like Cormier versus Lewis, where they were like scrambling to find a headliner because they couldn't find anything, and they just made DC versus the Black Beast. Not a good main event. I mean, you still had Weidman, Jacare, Israel Adesanya versus Derek Brunson. It was a pretty good main card, actually. A lot of middleweights on there. I mean, not the best MSG card. But then you even had UFC 244. Masvidal versus Diaz. Till versus Gastelum on the main card is the co-main. You had Wonderboy versus Luque. Kevin Lee versus Gregor Gillespie, the Black Beast versus Blagoy Ivanov. That was a sick main card. And to top the prelims, you had Johnny Walker versus Corey Anderson. That was a huge card, and I remember all the hype surrounding that pay-per-view. But I feel like ever since the pandemic, the UFC hasn't been putting any effort into these Madison Square Garden cards. Like, UFC 268 was actually pretty good. There was like 3 big fights on there, like Chandler versus Gaethje, and Namajunas, Weili 2, and Usman Covington 2. I felt like that's kind of all you needed. But then you also had the UFC debut of Alex Poatan Pereira on the prelims. So, I mean, that card wasn't the most stacked MSG card, but that was still a really good MSG card. And then 2022, UFC 281 was actually pretty good, but wasn't the most stacked MSG pay-per-view. You had Pereira Adesanya, good headliner. Whaley Carla, good co-headliner. Then the feature fight, Chandler Poirier. And then I think, oh yeah, you had Dan Hooker on the card too, so not bad. Frank Yeager's retirement fight. But not the greatest MSG card. Like, do you notice a pattern? As I'm going through these years, year by year, as the years go on, these MSG cards get weaker. And then UFC 295, the only two good fights worth being excited about was originally Jones Miocic, Pereira Yuri. Then Jones Miocic gets delayed till this year, and then it was Pereira Yuri main event, Aspinall, Sergey co-main. Those were like the only two big fights on that card that were worth looking forward to and being excited about. And then once again, there's only two big fights on MSG that are worth being excited about. Where the rest, I feel like the rest of these fights on this card, like outside of Oliveira Chandler and Jones Miocic, this feels like it could be a stacked fight night, honestly. Like, I don't know, the UFC just needs to put more effort into these MSG cards, and I hope, like, going forward into, like, I don't know, 2025, November next year, I hope that there's going to be a stacked Madison Square Garden card. And I mean, I'm not asking for, like, a UFC 300 level card, but come on, we've had so many stacked pay-per-views this year. Why can't UFC 309 be one of them? But, that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What would you change about this card? And so much for that card builder I did, eh? Like and subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and peace out.